great. So now I don't even have to do.
But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown. I amuse you.
God.
Eat shit. How's that? Eat shit. Eat shit. Eat shit.
Smile.
Definitely eat shit.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
You can't handle the truth!
What's up, everybody? I am not your usual host. Welcome to Your List Sucks. I'm Oyama filling in for Cody this week. We're doing A24 movies. You know, Cody's such a fan, he's just devastated that he couldn't be here. But I decided to fill in for him. We got an interesting panel here. I'll start with Aaron J. Aaron, how do you feel about the studio of A24? Is it better than A23?
Yeah, I slightly, you know, and yeah, it's okay. In honor of Kobe Bryant, you know, I'm here mostly, but I like the studio as well. Sorry.
And Scott, how do you feel about this episode here?
Pretty good. I'm just trying to redeem myself from last time. Not that I regret anything, but I think that I have a more friendly judge to my picks this time. Let me just put it that way.
And Dom, are you going to get third or fourth place? That's the big question here.
Look, I feel like at this point we should all know that I don't play for places. I just play for me. And as for my thoughts on A24, this studio is kind of one of the only reasons that I still have left to watch movies. So let's go.
Oh, classic. So if you've seen the show before, you know how it works. But just basically, we're going to go from 10 to 1. We're going to go in chunks. 10 to 8 is the first chunk. 7 to 4. 1 to 3. We're going to go person by person. This first part will be pretty brief. And we're going to first start with Aaron, if you want to go and tell us what your 10, 9, and 8s are. Yeah,
first of all, my list is dedicated to Brian Michaels, biggest A24 fan I know. Probably anybody knows. So definitely who my list is dedicated to, first and foremost. I went about my list with a lot of these. It was kind of time and place I saw them at, really adding to the overall experience. So my number 10 is Krisha, Trey Edward Schultz's first and debut feature film. I just really responded strongly to this one. It's done all at one location for nearly no budget, like $30,000 or whatnot, most of which is family members. It was semi-autobiographical. I have a lot of experience with addiction. Won't get into that, not personally, but family members. I've had similar types of issues come up at holidays, and just overall, I felt like this kind of rang pretty true to life. It stuck with me for a long time afterwards. I've revisited it. It's not one I enjoy, but it's definitely one that I feel is often overlooked and just a powerful overall experience. So the lead performance in that, and just I think one of still my favorite of Trey Edward Schultz's, including a few other ones that I had to leave off the list. So Krisha would be my number 10. My 9 is Ghost Story, David Lowery's film. Another one that really kind of a unique overall use of time in the movie. I hadn't really seen before. The music, the theme throughout the entire movie really is, I think, one of the best used in an A24 film. So, and it's just really good exploratory work, and I really worked for me. And my number 8 would be The Lighthouse, Robert Eggers' latest. Both Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe definitely deserve a lot of credit here.
Yikes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Good. So we'll talk about that a little more later.
Okay.
Let's start with your number 10, which is Krisha. Trey Edward Schultz, big A24 filmmaker. This is not my favorite of his. I do think this is a strong mood piece. And I think it really is, like, it has a great atmosphere. I just don't think it necessarily coalesces, especially I don't think it ends super satisfyingly, which is what would keep it off of my personal list. I think it's a pretty good movie. I just don't consider it sort of in that upper echelon of A24. And your number 9. This one is, for me, it's really good. I think I have to see it again to really reevaluate. I do love David Lowery overall as a filmmaker. But I do love the patience and how this sort of just lets you sit in the emotional stuff. I think that the scene with the pie is great. I know that's a bit of a contentious one. That's, I think, a sign of whether you're going to like the movie or not. If you hate that scene, then you're kind of going to be out on the movie as a whole. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good movie. And then, yeah, obviously we'll get to the lighthouse later. And for our next person, let's go to Scott with their 10, 9, and 8.
Yeah, so my number 10 is Never Going Back. My number 9 is While We're Young. And my 8 is Under the Silver Lake.
Yikes.
All right.
Okay, so my 10, Never Going Back. I'm not going to tell you that this is great cinema like a lot of the other movies on the list are, but this is just a really fun comedy that I think if you like Booksmart, which most people who saw it did, I did, I think you should check this one out because it's got a lot of similar vibes going on. There's a female friendship at the center that's all set over the course of this one day, and they're getting into these sort of hilarious misadventures. And so there are similarities. I think that Camilla Morone and Maya Mitchell have their chemistry is just as good as Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Devers in Booksmart. And there's a scene where they're high in a restaurant in this movie. That's like one of the funniest scenes of people being stoned that I can remember in a movie. And yeah, it uses gross out humor, which I typically don't like, in a pretty clever way by like creating situations where we're working hard to create these situations where it's funny, not just like presenting a gross out act and saying this is funny in and of itself. So I appreciate that. And yeah, people should check it out. It's a lot of fun, especially if you like Booksmart. And then my 9 was While We're Young. Along with Mistress America, this is probably my favorite Noah Baumbach movie. It's one of his funniest movies. I think that there's a lot of humor that he gets out of sort of the generational clash between Ben Stiller and Naomi Watts. There's this like older 30-something couple, and then Adam Driver and Amanda Seyfried as this hipster younger couple. But he manages to sort of talk about the way that these subsets of people interact with each other without being like condescending or like coming off as an old man shaking his fist on the lawn or anything like that. He talks about both groups in a pretty smart way, and I think that that's difficult to do. And he doesn't let either group off of the hook either, which is nice to see as well. So I like this one a lot.
Yeah, for your number 10, I do feel like this is kind of diet A24. This is like sort of a lesser Booksmart. I just don't think that that Maya Mitchell and Camilla Morone are really up to task. And the filmmaking is like just really derivative. There's a lot of like sort of direct ripping from Greg Araki's smiley face, I think, going on here. And then also, again, like there's a lot of the similarities with Booksmart. It's not great. I do think it's a pretty entertaining movie, but I definitely just think it's kind of a step below the rest of A24. So, you know, it's at number 10. I can't fault you too much for it. Number 9, this is actually a pick I like quite a bit. Baumbach is one of my favorite filmmakers. This is not one of my favorites. While We're Young is just a little tier below sort of Frances Ha's and Marriage Stories for me, I think. But I do think this is a very strong movie, and I think the scene of her dancing to Hit 'Em Up by Tupac is a great scene when she's taking the dance class. And I actually like the serious moments of this movie more than the sillier ones, I guess. That's kind of what makes it land for me a little bit more. But yeah, let's go to Dom with his 10, 9, and 8.
What's up, people? All right, so I already know that one of these is going to be a pundit, but that's good because it was a pundit that I already called. So my number 10 starting off, I got a double back-to-back eggers. I'll just run through my 10 through 8 so we can get over quick. My number 10 is The Vitch, double V, which I still don't know how to pronounce it, Robert Eggers. My number 9 is another... Yes, my number 9 is another Eggers, The Lighthouse. And my number 8 is Andrew Arnold's American Honey. So,
all right, so if you want to go ahead and talk about your 10 and then talk about your 8 after that.
Perfect. All right, so my number 10, The Witch. So Robert Eggers, this was a movie that I've been hearing about for a while.
You heard me, Yikes, right? I was just making sure.
No, yeah, for The Lighthouse, yeah.
And for Witch.
Oh, for The Witch. I did not realize that for The Witch. Okay, yeah, just go ahead and talk about American Honey then.
All right, perfect. American Honey. So,
we can talk about Lighthouse because I don't have it higher, so we can go ahead and talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
At 8, right, Aaron? Yeah.
So that's right. So it was in the same range for you. Okay, so go ahead and talk about The Lighthouse.
Perfect. All right, so The Lighthouse. This was I managed to squeeze in The Witch right before I watched this, but then I watched Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, and I was completely blown away. So without having saying anything about The Witch, the whole reason why I kind of like The Lighthouse a little bit more than The Witch is because The Witch, for as great as that movie is, it kind of undoes a little bit of its ambiguity with its third act. And The Lighthouse does not do that at all. And besides continuing what it is that Robert Eggers did so well with The Witch, with capturing that feeling of paranoia and complete just weird imagery with not knowing what quite is going on, and also capturing the ideal kind of state of human fear within isolation. He does that really well here. Some amazing performances, amazing production design. The craft in this movie is like close to being perfect, and it's topped off by the coup de grace that is that third act, which I literally have no idea. It's probably one of the only movies where I have no idea what's going on, and I love every single minute of it.
Okay, so can I pick up what he said?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
definitely. I'll get to The Witch more. It's lower on my list here, but I do have or higher on my list, however you want, lower number. With regards to Lighthouse, I do feel that these both are really strong. I think one of the places where The Witch comes through a little bit stronger for me is actually in its script, and overall, I just think I actually prefer the production design, the aspect ratio it used within The Witch of showing off the trees and everything, but I'll get to that more. With The Lighthouse, I really appreciate the comedy with it and everything like that. I appreciate that it was more ambiguous than The Witch. I didn't think The Witch was ambiguous at all. So I don't know when the third act ruined the ambiguity of The Witch. It had it all out there from the get-go. But Lighthouse, the comedy, the humor of it was definitely, I think, my favorite part. The Kraken design was amazing. It just, I hate to use a phrase like this, but the movie had texture to it. Seeing it in a theater, it felt like the ceiling was leaking, and it felt like I was going to get up from my seat and step in a puddle of cum or something. It was just the most jerking off of any A24 movie, I believe. I won't on that one, but that was harder.
Maybe that'll be a Your List Sucks one day.
Hey, right?
Yeah.
There we go. But either way, I go back and forth by the day of if I prefer Pattinson or Defoe. I think I'm on Defoe as of now, though.
Yeah.
I'm a SpongeBob kid growing up, and he just was a SpongeBob character brought to life.
Definitely.
To put it elegantly. So
yeah. And then I can actually talk about American Honey too.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Go ahead.
American Honey. So that was a movie that I heard a decent amount about. I was not familiar with this director's experience. I had no idea what it was. It was just one of those movies that I heard going in with 2016 that I just knew I had to watch. And I watched it, and 3 hours of just kind of on the road kind of perfection. This movie, to me, I feel like captures the spirit of America better than anything else, which is just kind of going out there, making it on your own, and just seeing what will come of it. Good, bad, no matter what. And kind of how it captures the feeling of finding yourself, finding your identity, finding love, figuring out that love isn't quite what it means, and just also capturing it in the sense of doing what Andrew Arnold does so perfectly, which is having, with the exception of the 3 primary leads, having a batch of non-actors fill out this cast and have it be and it just contributes overall to this film's completely 100% naturalistic feel. If not for the fact that the 7 movies that are higher on this are, to me, almost damn near perfect, I would have this movie a lot higher. But that's why I love American Honey.
All right, so as far as The Lighthouse, this is a movie I liked quite a bit. I do think it's a little scatterbrained. There's a lot of sort of Greek myth elements that I don't think quite coalesce in a super satisfying way. It's really good, and I actually find it strangely rewatchable. I think it's entertaining enough that you can watch it scene by scene, and there's just a lot of there's humor to be found in the conversations. Obviously, there's the very famous hark yelling and all that kind of stuff. I think that's pretty fun. American Honey, though, you did mention it is 3 hours, and it's just way too fucking long. Her other movies, especially Fish Tank, are just much more focused and much more well-researched. And I think this has a bunch of ideas, and it doesn't know what to do with them. I also just think Sasha Lane is not a particularly good actor. So I think that the movie kind of falls apart just because she doesn't bring the emotional core that the movie needs. You really have to be invested in her if you're going to take this entire journey with her. I do think that Shia and Riley Keough are really good, but yeah, I just overly long and just really a lot of ideas and nothing to do with them. I think it's a little. This is the type of A24 movie that I don't really like too much. It's a little full of itself, I think. But let's get on to Aaron's number 7.
Okay, so we're doing 7 through 5 here.
Individually, yeah.
Individually, though? Okay, gotcha. All right,
Yeah.
my number 7 is the Safdie Brothers Uncut Gems.
Yikes.
All right, we'll get to that one later. Yeah.
And so
Number
now
6.
my number 6 is Ari Aster's Hereditary. Okay, so this movie, I saw it under dangerous conditions of massive hype from, I believe it was Sundance or wherever festivals it was being called The Next Exorcist. I could ignore that, but I went into it with some pretty massive expectations. When I left the theater the first time, I was like, that was okay. And I didn't leave the theater thinking it was this revelatory experience, to be honest. And then I was talking about it 8 hours later with the people who also kind of said they didn't love it. And we kind of continued to talk about it. And then it was on the rewatch for me that it really kind of took it to the next level. A lot of the performances, like Alex Wolff and Millie Shapiro, who I thought the first time were kind of eye-rolly, the second time kind of made my skin crawl more than Toni Collette even, in a lot of ways. Because Toni Collette was the obvious performance in that movie, and just being able to see it in a theater twice and see things that were hidden in the shadows or weren't hidden in the shadows. Just the, reliving the thought process of Alex Wolff's character of just coming home and going upstairs and just laying there, waiting for his mother to go downstairs and discover what was down there. Just all that, the foreshadowing throughout it. I just really, each time I saw this movie, responded to it more so. I think all the performances are really amazing. The only scene that bothers me is kind of an Achilles heel of most A24 movies, and it's not knowing how to do a party scene. I don't think most A24 movies know how to do party scenes. They make them way too cool and picturesque. Like Ghost Story, which I forgot to mention with that, has a really infamous party scene with like a hipster doing a huge speech about life, which, like, again, the party scene, not the strongest part of Hereditary. The rest of the movie, super strong. And,
so this is one I like quite a bit. Okay. I do think it's really good. I think the performance is really strong. Although I do think Gabriel Byrne is kind of the weak link. I just don't think that he's sort of up to par dramatically with the rest of the actors. There's that one shot that I'll always remember is he's standing there and you see the shadow sort of on the back corner of the wall, and you don't even notice it at first, but it's like it's just horrifying. Sorry, what was that?
Just a little rebuttal to that. I think it kind of goes with the role of Gabriel Byrne in this movie as being the disconnected one who's just the family member who's like, all right, none of this is like the non-responsive one. I think he's supposed to be the most disinterested in a way, but just my opinion.
I guess I just didn't find his performance that interesting. I just think it was a little dry.
We're losing you.
Yeah, Paul, you froze. Damn. Internet shit the bed.
Yeah. So, like, Gabriel Byrne, I don't think he was dry. I think he was wet. My man was wet.
If only he'd been a little bit more wet.
Yeah,
Fire.
I waited for an extra second there because I really expected a yikes after Hereditary.
Right.
Yeah, you feel so uncool when your like movie doesn't get yikesed. You're just like, oh man.
If Hereditary was like good, people would yikes it.
Yeah.
So I'll step in while Paul's out.
Okay.
So Hereditary, you're 6. Aaron, what's your
5? My number 5 is Alex Garland's Ex Machina. All right.
Yikes.
Okay.
Yikes, because that's yikes.
Okay, that's a yikes. Then we'll go to your 4.
My 4.
Yep, your 4.
Okay, so now I can talk about Robert Eggers' The Witch.
Yes, let's go.
So I this was kind of one of the early A24 movies that really got me to realize this studio was the real deal. And I bought the script off A24's website, so it was a nice, pretty penny to get off there. But I've been able to, by going through and reading the script, I have been able to grow even more appreciation for the movie. It's so crafted and everything. It's all Robert Eggers here. I mean, he selected the right people for the roles for sure, but he crafts everything about this movie. The research, I think what The Lighthouse really showed, but it showed more here with the Witch. I mean, he researched every single movie. Everything just felt so authentic. The speaking, obviously, and again, the balls to not have the ambiguity here, I really appreciated. It showed you everything right showed you the witch taking the baby right at the beginning. It showed you the baby getting ground up and getting eaten, and then it just showed a destruction of a family. Black Phillip is the best A24 villain, I think. Maybe there's a few others that I'll come to on my list, but he's top 3 for sure. Those twins are horrifying. Being able to project the brother's sexual, desires for his sister as it being like a 12-year-old kid and not have that come off as creepy but authentic. That kid acted his ass off. Just again, the performances here, some of the best. It's just great, and definitely above The Lighthouse with regards to Eggers for me.
Yeah, I guess the only reason why is because I feel like, so you say the movie is not trying to be ambiguous. I think because the whole idea behind that movie is playing around with those Puritan superstitions and beliefs. And because I feel like the movie just decides to give you an easy answer at the end, I feel like that kind of takes away, because even though you kind of have this feeling that okay, at the end, she is going to turn out to be a witch, I feel like what the movie did so well was kind of playing around with the idea of like, oh, is she actually a witch, or is it just her teen angst mixed with just the feelings at the time? And I feel like with the movie kind of giving us that easy answer, it felt like a little bit too easy. But everything else you said is absolutely correct. Like my whole relationship with this movie was weird, because this is one of those movies that people told me to watch like nonstop, and I didn't get a chance to watch until The Lighthouse came out, so I could catch up on it and be familiar with Robert Eggers' style. And when I was completely blown away. I watched this movie on a train on my phone, and I was completely blown away by every single minute of it. I'm like, holy shit, this is one of the most well-crafted, like, this is like one of the things that reminded me that cinema is an art form. Like, that's how well-crafted this movie was.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like that, it was just after this, I realized which one of my friends I could go to movies with and which ones I wasn't going to be going to movies with anymore. This and It Comes at Night both helped me realize that very easily. So when I got around to Hereditary, I was able to have an 8-hour conversation with the people, because those 2 movies allowed me to just The Witch. I think it was a classic when it came out. It's going to hold up to be a classic moving forward. There's not anything about this movie that becomes dated.
I agree.
Just amazing.
100%.
All right, just to go back, finish real quick what I was saying earlier about Hereditary. I think it's really strong through and through. I love the diorama stuff and how physically it sort of distorts this physical space of the house. I think that's really clever. How it makes you sort of question what's where and how it's all positioned in the house. I do think the last, not even scene, but the last minute and a half just is really unnecessary, and I really would have wished he would have pulled back on the full communication of that idea. I think it's way scarier left sort of a little unsaid, as opposed to seeing the actual ritual happen. I think that really is sort of a weaker element of Hereditary. Did you guys all get to talk about his 6 and 5 already as well?
So the 5 was like a pun or whatever, because it was
okay.
And then then we just discussed The Witch back and forth, and I preferred it over Lighthouse.
Okay, yeah. I'll talk about The Witch a little bit here. I do think that the period elements are some of the stronger elements in the movie. I love that it's really just feels like you're in that time. I think the pace is really part of that too, just because life was so much slower and more deliberate in that era. I'm sort of mixed about the sort of ending and with the whole manifestation of her actually as a witch. I do love the Black Phillip character, and the scene of them locked in the barn with Black Phillip is, I think, really terrifying. I guess it's just a thing with a lot of A24 horror for me, is I think when it gets to the very end, it just doesn't quite get across the finish line in the same way that it does for the rest of the movie. Maybe it's been more the front half is stronger necessarily than it being an issue of the endings being weak. But for me, that's what keeps it a little behind I do think this is one of the best, sort of one of their best horror endeavors. But it's a little beyond, it's a little below being sort of like a master sort of work in the genre for me. So I guess, yeah, that's how I feel about The Witch. And then we can go on to Scott with his number 7.
Okay, my 7 is Lady Bird. Didn't get yikes. Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, Lady Bird is amazing. I love coming of age movies. There's a couple others on this list, but yeah, this movie is such a beautifully realized sense of like time and place and what it's like to grow up and discover like the perfection in the imperfection, I guess is one way to put it, of these experiences that you have, these formative experiences that you have at this time of your life, and the relationships between the family members are so well drawn. Obviously, Laurie Metcalf, so fantastic. The scene at the airport, I mean, that'll get you every time. But Tracy Letts is also really good at the dad. I think an underrated scene is where he goes and sees his son interviewing for the same job as him. That's also a really sort of heartbreaking scene that says a lot with saying a little. And yeah, I mean, what can you say about Saoirse Ronan? She's perfect in pretty much every role. And yeah, she showed some different sides to her as an actress in this movie that I think maybe people would have thought she was capable of, based on the movies that she'd been in prior to this. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that Greta Gerwig made a movie this accomplished and confident with her first movie, and maybe even more amazing is that her second movie is even better. So yeah, Lady Bird's awesome.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. I actually probably like it a little more than Scott here. It's a really personal story for me, which is a part of the reason I connect to it so strongly. I do think that there's sort of this interesting universality in the specificity of her character. There's not everyone can necessarily relate to every aspect of who she is, but I think when you see how finely drawn and how perfectly rounded as a person that she is, I think that helps her become a much more interesting character. Even just the way that she's acting when they're going to pick out dresses for prom, and the way she interacts with her friends and how her relationship to Jules changes. I think that's really interesting. And sort of the length she's willing to go to fit in and to look cool. When she talks about living on the other side of the tracks, that's this sort of division within white suburbia that I think is a little underseen, I think, and is really interesting. I think it's a funny and also heartfelt movie, but yeah, I think it's great. As for Dom and Aaron, why is this not on your list?
I enjoy Greta Gerwig as a filmmaker. I think that she still has yet to make a movie that I love. I enjoyed this movie a decent amount when I saw it, but I was probably one of the only people that didn't think that it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, only because for me, I'm like, this is a very well-made directorial debut, but this movie is not exactly showing me things that I haven't seen in a coming-of-age story before. I didn't think all the performances necessarily worked for me. I thought the direction was a little bit confusing at points, more so to the fact of where I honestly felt like the direction towards the parents felt very one-sided, almost in a weird way, unfairly. I do agree with you on the Tracy Letts part. I think that's probably the most underrated performance of that entire movie, and I do agree with you 100% on that scene where he's interviewing for the same job as his son. But other than that, yeah, this was a movie where I'm like, everyone else loved this movie, and I'm like, this is a really good movie. It's just not one of my favorites.
Yeah, kind of similar to Dom here. I really liked it. There could only be 10 on my list, and for me, some of the nostalgic elements kind of distracted me from the movie. They felt like they weren't weaved in kind of well enough for me not to notice them, particularly just Crash into me just overall really just didn't work for me. It's kind of I mean, it was good. I appreciate it as a secret prequel to Frances Ha as well. So that really made me like it a little bit more because I love Frances Ha. But, it just couldn't make my top 10. There's only 10 movies. So it's a good movie, though. I didn't dislike it. Just didn't connect to it as much as you, Paul. So
and Scott, your number 6.
My 6 is 20th Century Women.
Great choice.
It's a great movie. I just missed my 10 though.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I was trying to think earlier today about what it is that I love about this movie the most. I think it reminds me a lot, actually, of some of the best movies of probably my favorite director, which is Richard Linklater. I think that it has a really specific sense of time and place, kind of like Lady Bird does. There's kind of this aimlessness to the plot where it's not really going any particular place. It's more just about sort of getting to experience these characters and their relationships with each other. And then it has all those characters that you just like spending time with and you want to spend more time with even after the movie is over. And so I think maybe that's some of the reasons why I like it so much. It really sort of engages in some scenes with the political landscape of this particular era in time, like the late 70s in Southern California, which I really appreciate. The performances are amazing. This is probably one of my favorite Annette Bening roles. And Greta Gerwig has a scene at a dinner table, which no one who has seen the movie will forget. That's pretty great. And yeah, across the board, this is one I just keep coming back to, and I think I find new things in it each time. So I'm really looking forward to whatever Mike Mills does next.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites as well in terms of A24. I think that the different insights that Jamie gets from different women in his life and what different points they are at in life is what sort of makes this coalesce, I think, into such a great film and like such a satisfying sort of character piece where you don't really know much about him as a person, but I think it's about him finding out about the world. And it's an interesting sort of reversal on the character study. You're not learning about him, it's him learning about the world. And I think that's what kind of makes it such a great movie. I think this might be the best Greta performance, actually. Like, I love Frances Ha as a movie, like quite a bit more. But I think that the performance in this is like the best channeling of her sort of nervy energy and her sort of expression of self. I think is really good in this. I love the scenes where they go dancing. I think that's really great stuff. And I just think overall, there's so much warmth and interesting sort of ideas about our world and women's place in it that I think like Mike Mills is such a great filmmaker, and this is one of my favorites as well. So yet again, here we are. Why do you two not have this on your list?
I'll go first here on this one. I really wish I would have put this on my list, to be honest. It was really battling with, a lot of movies on this list. I was raised by my mom and her friends. My dad passed away when I was super young. So I really personally responded to being raised directly with the feminine perspective and not, still having, the same kind of issues that any other guy will have as he's growing up and coming into the world. And it was just done very authentically. The aimlessness of the plot I don't view as a bad thing at all.
No.
Yeah, I have nothing really bad to say about this movie. I think that the fact that a lot of people haven't seen it is kind of unfortunate and just, a reflection on bigger issues with overall audiences and the response to certain types of stories as opposed to other stories. I think if this was called something other than 20th century women, maybe it was called something else. I think more people would have saw it. So that may seem kind of off the vibe, but definitely one of the most underseen. And I think people are surprised when they realize it's an A24 movie, because I think this is very different from a lot of what A24 has to offer in a good way. So
yeah, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I still love it. If I'm remembering correctly, I think I still have it in my top 10 from that year. Mike Mills continued his track record of being a very personal filmmaker. Beginners was a movie he made about his dad, and this was a movie he made spiritually about his mom. And that shows in every single frame of this movie. It was just a matter of just placement on the list. Like it's literally like this close to cracking top 10, and it just got edged out by a few others that I saw recently. Like it's been a really damn good last couple of years for A24, and so the fact that this got edged out just shows to me like the quality of the studio overall. Like,
I do think it's interesting to see what stuff when there is so much comparable quality, what connects to people more, and I think that says sort of some interesting things about them as film fans and as people. But go ahead to your 5, Scott.
Okay, The Spectacular Now is my 5.
Nope.
Okay, well, I have a very unique list, I guess. Yeah, Spectacular Now, another coming-of-age movie. This one really sort of blew me away. This was one that I had a lot of hype going into it for me and somehow lived up to it. I think that this movie engages with particular themes that a lot of teen movies don't really, particularly alcoholism. Obviously, James Ponsoldt looked at that in his first movie, which is Smash, but this movie looks at it from a teenage perspective. Like I said, I think that a lot of teen movies don't really engage with that particular concept, and we see, of course, that it's generational, and Kyle Chandler shows up as his dad, and we see that the negative impact that he is having on his son's development. And yeah, I think that I appreciate that this movie doesn't kind of brush away the difficulties that these two very different people would have in having a romance with each other. Obviously, like Miles Teller being this sort of magnanimous, really outgoing guy, and Shailene Woodley being sort of the wallflower. I think in some movies that they would sort of they'd be like, oh, well, they have their differences, but they kind of brush them under the carpet. But no, this movie, I think, really asks a lot of hard questions about whether they'd really be able to make this relationship work. And I like that the movie is from Miles Teller's perspective, because I think in a lot of movies, it's sort of in a lot of these movies, it's the wallflower type character who we get the perspective of. And so I like getting the perspective of the quote unquote cool kid character, in Miles Teller and Sutter in this movie. And yeah, it takes some twists down the third act that I think work pretty well. I really love the final shot of the movie. And yeah, it's a really, again, another underrated, I think, coming of age movie that people should see.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of the similar thoughts. I do think that this is one of the great final lines in a movie that I've seen in quite some time. I think it's so satisfying, and is such a great callback to sort of the way the story begins. It's weird. I think that Amy is one of the more likable characters that I've seen in a coming of age movie in like a long, long time. She's so pure of heart, pure of soul, is just trying to be supportive of Sutter. And that scene where they visit his dad, and then on the way back, obviously there's the whole thing with their car ride. And I think that is like one of the most difficult to stomach scenes, just because you hate to see someone just throwing something away that is just right there within their grasp. And it's so simple for them to just be a good person, but sometimes it's difficult for people. And I do like that the side characters are drawn to be full people as well. Where the Brie Larson character, I think in a lot of other movies, would be a lot more simple, but I think you see there's nuance there with her relationship with Sutter. And I think she's allowed to be a person in a way that I think a lot of movies like this wouldn't necessarily let her character be. But yeah, I think that the two leads are phenomenal. And it's such an interesting sort of twist again on, the sort of the wallflower as being that figure in the distance, and you're sort of more in the interiority of the person who's more seen as more outgoing. But yeah, Dom and Aaron, here we are again. Another coming of age female film. Through line there.
We're kind of sexist here. What's going on? Again, it's really a matter of like A24 quality. Like, there's so many damn good movies, and this movie was in my top 10 until like just recently. And I freaking love this movie. R.I.P. to James Ponsol's film career, which died with The Circle, but we don't need to talk about that. I love every single minute of this movie. I don't have really a bad thing to say about it. I think the scene that probably speaks to me the most is the scene where he's sitting down with Bob Odenkirk as his boss, and Odenkirk's like, I'll give you a job, but you gotta stop drinking, and he just walks out. He's like, I'm not even gonna bother. But the ambiguity that goes into that scene, where it's like whether it's just because he knows he doesn't have the strength to be able to stop drinking, or if it's just because he doesn't want to embarrass this storefront that he's put so much of himself into, or whether it's just an overall lack of commitment. It's like all those different feelings, and they're all completely understandable within that one moment. And again, like, I love this movie. I don't have a single bad thing to say about this movie.
And I think that mirrors what the choice his father made so many years ago. In such a parallel way. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think maybe that is why I didn't quite connect to that. I don't have that fatherly connection or curse type of relationship, and so I don't really understand. I didn't quite connect to it, and at times, for me, Miles Teller really felt like he was like really acting. Like, I guess it really didn't. It took me out of the performance at some points. It felt like felt very I prefer Shailene Woodley in this movie. Not that you have to choose one or the other, but I bought her performance a lot more. I thought she played a really convincing wallflower, which is hard to do in any movie. But yeah, I just didn't connect with Miles Teller really. This is not the performance of his that sold me on Miles Teller, I guess. So just there's other movies I liked a lot more than this one, to be honest, with A24.
All right, and then Scott to your number 4.
Okay, my number 4, another female coming of age movie, Uncut Gems.
Yeah, yikes.
Okay.
All right, and let's go over to Dom.
Oh, we're on me now? Finally. Yes,
Number 7.
My 7. So my number 7, again, I don't think this is going to be a yikes for anyone. This is just me saying that. And that is Gaspar Noé's Climax. This was a movie that the first time I watched it, I was on acid, tripping balls. Don't ask me why I decided to watch this movie of all movies, but I did. And ye gods, this is, again, it's not a movie that I would recommend in any sort of conventional sense, but because I just love those types of movies that just create this crazy, nutso, like different otherworldly experience almost within a setting that you would find familiar, because it's those familiar settings that usually end up being the most terrifying. And taking a troupe of dancers where the entire first like 20 to 30 minutes of this movie it's just a dance montage, and then having brief character interactions followed by the worst acid trip of like ever put to screen. My whole thing with this movie is that, yes, it's cynical, it's nightmarish, but it's through those kind of little interactions that you kind of get those brief little specks of humanity. You know, it's kind of similar to a Walking Dead situation where it's like, you may not like a lot of the characters in there, but you feel for it in the sense that like no human being should ever have to go through a situation like that. And Gaspar Noé, the way that he films it is just, it's a combination of nightmarish and humanistic. It's the most nightmarish humanistic movie that you'll ever watch in your lifetime. And so that's why I love Climax. My number 6.
Whoa. Yeah, so we're going one by one with these.
Yes.
So Climax, I think, is overall a strong mood piece, but I just don't think it does much beyond that. Any movie that discourages me from drinking sangria is going to get a thumbs down. No, but I think it's really good camera work, I think. But I do think that this is a lesser version of his other films. I think those films are much more unsettling and much more – they make more sense, I think, within the realm that they're portraying. I think that this doesn't quite come together as like a truly great movie. I think it's good and it's really unnerving, and I especially like near the end where they're on the floor and you see the camera is like willing itself to not go where you want it to go. Like you really want to see what's something that's just outside of the frame, but it doesn't quite let you get the full range of vision. And I think that is a really cool camera trick kind of. But I think, yeah, again, beyond that and some of the sort of dancing sequences, I think it's a little thin, and it's just one sort of a little repetitive for me in terms of the things that it's trying to accomplish. But Scott and Aaron, why was Climax not on your list?
Do you want to go, Scott?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it's short for me because I haven't seen it, so that's why it's not on my list. But I will say, Dom, your description did kind of make me want to see it a little bit.
Thank you.
I have seen this, and I've seen a lot of Gaspar's work, and I agree with Paul. This is, if you've seen his other work, I feel like this is kind of the lesser of it, and I agree with you. The characters were really not good people, and they didn't deserve to have it go through it, but it didn't make it exactly more difficult to see them go through it necessarily. And seeing this on acid probably was a solid experience, so maybe I'll partake in that and take you up on that aspect of it. But I mean, I can't put that on my top 10. Honestly, it would struggle to make my top 10 of last year's A24 movies.
Yeah, I mean, this might be the first episode ever watched by the NYPD, but Dom, you can go ahead with your number 6 on the list.
Hey, man, it's I was about to say, look, all I know is I'm only incriminating myself here, so you guys got nothing to worry about. My number 6 is Benny and Josh Safdie's, not their first feature film, but their first film under the A24 banner. That, of course, to me, it is still not being unfairly getting enough attention, even with the widespread amount of attention that Uncut Gems is getting, because my number 6 is Good Time. This was the movie that my buddy and teammate Dustin Mason first recommended to me in 2017, saying this looks like one of the craziest movies of this year. And I had no idea what to make of this. I'm like, okay, this just looks like another like gritty street drama like I've seen this before. But the camera work looked cool enough, the set design and the lighting looked cool enough, and the score to me was really entrancing. And so when I finally sat down and watched this movie, I was like, okay, this is another film experience. And that means a lot to me, because to me, even if a film is not like the most compelling, if it has that one little extra bit of kick that helps propel it to like that experience level, and that makes a lot of difference for me. And this was, again, I don't think it's as flashy as Uncut Gems, and that's probably why it didn't get, to me at least, that's why it didn't get the amount of attention that it did. But to me, everything that made Uncut Gems as good as it did is what makes this movie compelling. It's, again, it's every criticism that went for it. It's basically Midnight Run, where you're following Robert Pattinson throughout this one trek journey to get his brother out of jail. And it is so compelling, not only in his performance, not only in the cinematography, not only in the score, but just in the sense of, like, it's one of the first movies to actually bring the gritty feel back to New York, almost, if that makes any sense. And that's kind of a move that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. Not to mention the supporting performances, which are already incredible and compelling enough. But yeah, this was a movie that I for me was a huge surprise. I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, and I was very, very impressed by it.
Yeah, I actually ended up seeing this one pretty late. For whatever reason, I just had never put the time in to watch it. And I think about a year or so ago, I finally did see it. I mean, and this is like a really anxious movie. I actually like had to stop it. Like when there's a certain part where he's staying at these people's house, and he's about to do something that involves the girl that lives there, that it just made me really uncomfortable. I had to sort of take a breath and relax. But I do think that it's really strong in that it sort of is never lets up. It's like this never ending, crazy nights. I think it's more of an after hours thing than a midnight run. I think it's that night that really is just spiraling out and out and out of control. The music does a lot of heavy lifting. It's not my favorite 2017 movie where the main character takes advantage of Barkhad Abdi, but overall, I do think it's a really good movie. I think that maybe the weak link for me is Benny Safdie in this movie. I just don't think he brings what I want that character to be, and is not as compelling as I wanted that to be, I guess. I do think it's got a pretty strong ending, though, and overall, it's a really, really good movie. Just not quite for me in the top tier of A24. So why did you guys not have this?
I really like the movie. I think for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, I think Pattinson's great. I love the score, but I think that it was pitched to me as like being, oh, this crazy, like intense, anxiety-inducing experience or whatever. And I'm not sure that it ever quite got quite to that level for me. Whereas like Uncut Gems was pitched the exact same way, and I did get there by the end. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I think this is what some people were talking about with Good Time. But I still think it's a really good movie, and the Safdies are great.
Yeah, pretty similar, I would say. I just have a few other movies that go along the everything going wrong in one night or one span of time, and just the character making horrible decisions with his heart in the right place. Paul Walker's running scared. I just prefer that to Good Time a little bit.
Wow.
He's like, I know. I saw it at a young age, and to me, that's what kept coming up in this movie for me. So maybe it's just like my personal thing. I brought this. I still really liked it, but it's just I didn't have as good of a time with Good Time as everybody else did too.
Oh,
so
you guys with the puns.
All right, number 5, Dom.
Yeah, my number 5 is another one. I don't know if this is going to get a yikes from anyone, but my number 5 is Jonah Hill's Mid-90s. I don't know what it is with me and Dustin in these movies, but me and Dustin have had a really strange relationship with these A24 movies going back to about 2017. And first 2017, he recommends me Good Time. And then in 2018, him and me are actually like some of the first 2 people on the East Coast to actually be able to see the movie. We actually caught an early screening of this back in July. And I'm not going to say that it heavily influenced and biased my opinion, but it heavily influenced and biased my opinion towards this movie because holy shit, you want to talk, I feel like every single person's thought process on Lady Bird was my thought process going towards mid-90s, because this was a movie that just felt completely genuine, completely raw, completely heartfelt, and coming from Jonah Hill, who directs this movie like a pro. Like, I don't know if he had like a ghost director in here at the time, but this movie was directed in a way that did not feel like a first-time director. And I can't say that about a lot of different people's. Like even Bradley Cooper with A Star Is Born, that felt like a first-time director. This did not feel like a first-time director. And there was just something about this movie I feel that really spoke to me, which is really crazy considering the fact that like I didn't grow up in that type of an environment. You know, I grew up in like a pretty cushy suburban lifestyle, so there's like kind of nothing that's relatable there to me. But the fact that I found something so endearing about this kid and the struggles that he had to go through, I really, really enjoyed it. And to me, it's one of the most compelling movies. It was my number 2 of 2018. Very, very much enjoyed it, and I can see the Paul is cringing there. So
okay, that's enough. That's enough. Here we get to the part where I agree with sort of the Brian Michaels thesis on A24. This movie is all sizzle, no steak. There's just nothing to this movie. I think it's cool style. It's got good music, but that's all it is. I just think that you pick the least interesting character in this entire group of friends and you make the movie about him. And I get that it's the Jonah Hill stand-in and this and that. But there's just not really much interesting about Stevie. I don't think what he does you don't really even know what he's interested in or what he cares about. The relationship between him and Lucas Hedges is just all over the place. It doesn't really make sense. Like, you don't really understand what they are to each other. And that is just, again, super inconsistent. I think that the other characters around him, like I think Knock Smith is actually really great in this movie. I think Ray is just a character that's 10 times more interesting than Sunburn. I don't think that they really fleshed out the Catherine Watterson character in a way that makes you really get Stevie and care about Stevie in that way. To me, this is just a movie that is just, again, it's all sizzle, no steak. I don't think there's much of an emotional core or anything like that to the movie. And, maybe it does, portray a subculture in sort of an interesting way, but I think it just picks the most boring window to look at it through. And this is like one of the most disappointing movies for me of the entire 2010s because I was super excited for it. You can cut a great trailer with a movie like this, but I just don't think it's a very good movie at all. Scott and Aaron, which side of the fence do you more land on in terms of this movie?
I actually haven't seen this one either, but my roommate and I were talking about it last night and saying that we should watch it because neither of us had seen it. But now I really don't know what to do because I've got such wildly different opinions on it. But I haven't seen this one, so I can't weigh in, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I have. I'm about 50-50 on this one. No skate pun there. But it's like really like I really am with this one because I grew up as a skater. I was the boring sunny character of my group. And so and I'm very aware of that. And to me, like I grew up on the East Coast, so maybe this is the East Coast, West Coast difference. But I just was like, that was, okay. There was nothing like super memorable about it to me though. And like the parts that were shocking were like, okay, I'm going to shock you here. And like, they didn't really, I guess. And I really didn't love the ending. So like
what ending? What ending really?
Yeah. I mean, whatever with the tape and like very cute, like get it. But, besides that, it's just not anywhere. It's definitely towards the bottom. It's just, ahead of like Laggies and Low Tide, those kind of.
I wouldn't put it at a Laggies, but that's a whole other conversation.
That's fair enough. I mean, Laggies isn't terrible, but it didn't make my list. Spoiler alert. So yeah, I mean, it's okay. I can't believe it made your 5 though. So.
Yeah. And also there's a scene that's played for laughs that I just don't think should ever be a thing that's played for laughs. It's really weird and not. I don't know. That didn't work for me at all. But let's go to your number 4, Dom.
My number 4 is probably the most predictable batch here, and I don't know if this is going to get a yikes. I know it got a yikes before, so I think we'll be able to talk about it here, if I'm not mistaken, because my number 4 is Alex Garland's Ex Machina.
Yeah, it's my 5.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, like, is there anything that we can say about this movie now that hasn't been said already? Like, this movie to me is like a damn near masterpiece. Put Alex Garland on the map, showed what he's capable of as a director. If you believe everything that happened behind the scenes with Dredd. Mm-hmm. Just this movie finally being the movie to kind of take the logical next step in terms of kind of exposing what artificial intelligence can do and almost kind of exposing the sentience behind the machine before Black Mirror really even got a chance to tackle that fully, because the 3rd season of Black Mirror wouldn't happen for another year until after this movie. And it's so funny because to me, this movie is, everybody talks about this as being one of A24's best, but when you think about it at the time, it's like it flew so under the radar that like it's still, that just shows the staying power of this movie, that it is still so talked about and is one of A24's best. The performances are great. The set design is absolutely incredible. Even by A24 standards, which is already known for like its amazing production design and cinematography, like this movie to me like takes that up a level. Even 5 years later, it's still one of their most masterful efforts.
All right, Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, the special effects in this movie, to be able to talk about special effects and just overall production in an A24 movie, it's just, they stretched their dollar to the absolute max in this movie. And the all four performances of the main performances are amazing. I went into this not knowing how to pronounce the movie. I called it Ex Machina when I got my ticket. I didn't know anything about and it's a movie that it's not. It definitely, again, it's something I've said about a lot of movies. It has a staying power. It hasn't gotten dated. The technological elements of it, the philosophical elements of it, they all, I think, are more poignant today as they become more apparent in our society. So I think this movie is really, really brilliant. It's immensely rewatchable too, for being such a simple premise. So I love it. Great.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite A24 movies as well. Alex Garland is a filmmaker I admire quite a bit. It's interesting. I think when you hear different people talk about it, who they side with in this movie, which character they side with, I think says a lot about who they are as people. And I think that Alex Garland is very clearly not on the side that a lot of people seem to be taking, is all that I'll say. I do think that this is more of a movie about the fear of the future than about sort of self-discovery or innovation. And I think it's more of a warning sign than anything else. But again, the production design is amazing. I think the way they design Ava is so brilliant. She looks, again, like futuristic, but not futuristic to the point that it looks ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I love that this shots by the waterfall, and just the entire estate is so beautiful. Obviously, the dance scene has become somewhat iconic sort of in the last few years. And that's an amazing sort of expression of this tense artist who doesn't get a release. But this is one of my favorites. I don't love the Donald Gleason performance. That if I had to knock anything in the movie, he's a little stale. But overall, I don't think the movie suffers too much from that. But Scott, why did you not have this on your list? But you did have Never Going Back. So let's remember that.
Oh wow!
It was my number 10. It was my number 10. This movie's great. It was my number 13. I really like it. I think I'm not a huge sci-fi fan. But Alex Garland, the complexity of his movies has drawn me to them. And not that this is anything against Ex Machina, but I actually think I like Annihilation more. So that might be why I dropped this a couple spots. But I mean, to echo what people have said about some of my earlier choices, I think it's you have to necessarily make hard choices when you're ranking this movies, and dropping this out of the top 10 was just one of those hard choices.
All right, now we're on to the top threes.
Yes.
Let's go first to Aaron. What is your number 3 A24 movie?
So number 3 for me is Under the Silver Lake. So I believe that was your 8 or 9, Scott, was it right?
It was my 8, yeah.
8, yeah. So this movie, it's one of the few times I've really felt like A24 did their movie wrong with how it didn't really distribute this movie, didn't release it for whatever reasons. I get that the plot is all over the place, and that is one of my favorite parts of it. The saturation of the colors is incredible throughout this movie. I'm all about it. I've never been to LA, and this makes me never want to go to LA, this movie, but I really thought that Andrew Garfield playing this kind of asshole stoner. This to me is my Big Lebowski. I really do like Big Lebowski, but to me, this is like my aimless stoner journey movie that to me I respond to more than any other. It has everything I love. I love theorizing about pop culture. When this movie came out, it was like in spite of me caring about Game of Thrones and theorizing about every bit of that and Westworld, and it just took that and then just kind of flipped it on its head. The piano scene is one of my favorite scenes in any A24 movie ever. I really just everything about the things that don't work, they still work for me in a way. So it's just I really just don't know why A24 was so afraid of releasing this movie, but I loved everything about it, and it goes for it, and it's way out there, and it works for me in every aspect.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I think It Follows is a movie that it's just incredible to me, and I will never forget the first time I saw it in a theater. And so I was always looking forward to this movie. Obviously, like you said, it was in development hell for a while. I guess I kind of get it in the end, why that was the case, but nevertheless, I'm very glad I got to see it. And yeah, it's there's so much going on. I think that from a technical perspective, like the trio of Mitchell and Mike Jalakis, who's the cinematographer, and then Disaster Piece, who does the score, like the three of them, between this movie and It Follows, they create such an unbelievable atmosphere. Like there might not be any better like trio out there for just creating this like dreamlike atmosphere. And yeah, there's so many interesting themes going on in the movie about, like you said, like the mysteries of pop culture. And do they really mean anything? Do we really just create them for ourselves? The songwriter scene and, kind of lamenting the lack of originality. I think Andrew Garfield's performance is really interesting. It's just a great example of a director getting a bigger budget because he made a successful movie and then being like F you to all mainstream audiences basically by making this movie. And yeah, it's funny. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain why the movie is so sort of captivating, but I think it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this is one I think that if, the way that it's talked about generally, I think it's a little underappreciated, but I do think that this is like kind of insane to me to have this on a top 10 A24 list. It's interesting. It's got a great scene. The piano scene's great. And I think the Garfield performance is really fun. But I just think it's kind of just like a weak Inherent Vice pastiche that is really aimless and not in a way that really makes you think. I think it's really a way that just walks in circles, and I don't think ultimately it knows what it wants to say or what it wants to do. There's, again, the core idea about sort of the self-mythologizing that Garfield's character is doing has potential, but ultimately I just think that this movie has no idea what it wants to do with that. So it's an interesting movie, but I just think when you compare this to other great movies made, but like within the studio, this is like just not one of their best. And I think it's not, it wasn't in development hell, it was in release hell, because A24 often does that because, they pick their golden boy movies that they want to push, and then the rest of the movies just get thrown into direct to DVD to VOD kind of stuff. So I think that is one sort of issue with A24 is that they really do, they have their favorite children, and the other ones kind of just get tossed to the side. And this is an example of that. And maybe a little bit rightfully so. But Dom, why was this not on your list?
Again, it was just a matter of too many good movies got pushed out. I'm considering a reorganization at some point, but this film to me is a masterclass. I think the only reason why it is where it is because it didn't quite do it for me the first time I saw it. But upon like a rewatch and a revisit, I'm like, yeah, this movie is damn near close to being a masterpiece, especially with all of the statements about pop culture and our obsession with it.
I guess I just don't think that the statements are saying like much of anything. They're just like, hey, what about this pop culture thing? But anyway.
But is that all of pop culture though? Is it pop culture really saying anything?
So deep. Oh man, I love generic criticism of popular culture. Anyway, go ahead, Scott. You're number 3.
My number 3 probably won't surprise you all that I have this on my list based on how it's gone so far, but 8th Grade is my number 3. This another like amazing coming of age movie. I think that what this movie captures so well is the anxiety of growing up. This has like the anxiety level of like Uncut Gems, honestly, when you talk about the relatability of some of the scenes, but also like just being tough to watch. Like the Truth or Dare scene obviously is a great example of you almost just have to look away. But I one of the most impressive things is Bo Burnham as a director in this movie, and that this was his, that this was his first film, like some of the other debut directors we're talking about. I love some of the directorial choices he makes. I think the pool scene is like really well shot. The way we see her like behind the glass door, literally and figuratively, and then she has to go out and wade into the pool. I don't know. Coming of age movies have had some really good pool scenes recently. Booksmart has a good one too, but. And Elsie Fisher is wonderful. I think she feels like a real person. And the movie is full of like these small moments small sort of unpredictable moments where it's like this could go either really good or really bad for her. And sometimes it goes really good for her and sometimes it goes really bad. And I think that that's kind of what this time of your life is like. And when it goes really bad, you feel it with everything you have. And when it goes really well, you're so happy for her. Like when she calls the girl that she took her on the tour at school, the high school girl, and every part of you is like, no, like why are you doing this? She's not going to want to talk to you, whatever. And then it takes a twist and turns out that the other girl, Olivia, is actually great. And so, yeah, this movie, maybe, I mean, definitely, I think better than even the other coming of age movies on my list, captures what it's like to be at this particular period in your life in a way that really resonated with me.
Yeah, I guess I feel the way about this movie that a lot of people feel about Lady Bird, where I do think it's well made, and I don't think that there are necessarily any super glaring flaws, but I just think it doesn't get quite to the level I think that a movie like this needs to get to really become so resonant. There are really great moments, really great scenes. I do like that sort of turning on its head of the girl actually turning out to be nice, but I think ultimately it just kind of ends with a whimper. And the scene at the fireplace, I think with the father is really great. I think that relationship is maybe my favorite part of the movie. But ultimately, I just think that you can just feel this is a first-time director, I think. I think the writing is actually a lot stronger than the direction. The construction of the scenes is better than the execution of them, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think that this movie just falls a little short for me, despite the fact that she is really great in this film. But yeah, what do you guys think of this?
My only thought process on this movie is that, again, I really, really enjoyed it. It's not one of my favorite A24 movies. It comes close. The whole thing with me was the realization that the seniors in high school in this movie were my youngest brother's age, who were in 8th grade when I was a senior in high school. So just that kind of whole circle is now complete mentality was just a little bit much for my brain. But I'm like, oh shit, the people who are going into high school are my cousin's age. Wonderful. So just kind of a little rude awakening for me for that.
So Dom's old anyway. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah. This movie, if we're going to compare it to Lady Bird, worked better for me than Lady Bird. But I think that overall, I really, really liked how Bo Burnham's comedic voice was able to come through in the writing while not sounding like it was Bo Burnham telling jokes about 8th grade. So I'll give a credit for that, with the direction also. And it's just one of these that it's one that I really liked, and I just didn't love it, and I wanted to love it. It was relatable to, it reminded me a lot of my middle school experience and everything like that, and just didn't quite connect with me. I haven't gone and revisited it, and I revisit a lot of my A24 movies. This is one I don't see myself revisiting anytime soon. So just we're down to a final 3. It's tough, top 10 even. So
Aaron brings chicken nuggets to every party. Anyway, moving on to your number 3, Dom.
My number 3. So this is probably one, and I'm actually really happy that I might be the only one to actually bring this up. My number 3 is Swiss Army Man from the Dans, Quan and Shiner. And the first time I saw this movie, I loved it. The second time I watched this movie, I loved it even more. But there's this thing about like road movies, buddy movies, just like two people getting to know each other, and also when one of them is a corpse. Obviously, that can create for a little bit of midriff and a little bit of confusion. And I know this movie kind of got a bad rap with kind of getting like the internet name of, oh, it's Weekend at Bernie's meets like just another road trip movie. But this movie had such a raw heart and a genuine charm to it that I haven't seen from a lot of movies recently. And there was just something so kind of fresh about the friendship between Radcliffe and Dano, how innocent their conversation seemed, even though they were about like the most basic of things, where like Dano has to explain to Radcliffe what sex is, even though that can kind of become awkward and uncomfortable, consider that he used his boner as a compass like not even 10 minutes ago. It's like there's a real charm to that, and kind of this idea of realizing, oh wait, Radcliffe has never experienced any of these things because he's a corpse, or if he did, like he can't remember them. And kind of the fact that the movie doesn't need to explain anything as to how Radcliffe is still alive and communicating with Dano, while kind of letting you infer all of these different things about the relationship and what is actually going through both of their heads. It's a beautiful movie to me. It's still such an unconventional movie, which is what I love, and it's still something that's held with me like all these years since I've seen it.
Yeah, I think this is a movie that just feels really juvenile to me. I think it's quirky for the sake of being quirky a lot of times at the expense of satisfying character moments. The relationship the film has to women and the way that they think about women, I think, says a lot about sort of what this movie has on its mind. And I don't think that, again, when it comes to the end, when he eventually does run into the girl from the picture on his phone, I think the way that resolves itself ultimately is just really dissatisfying, and it makes the other stuff before that just feel kind of empty. And the fact that it ends on like the same kind of joke that it was peppering throughout the movie, I think is kind of lame. It was just like a movie that felt weird for the sake of weird, and I just didn't think came together in any sort of satisfying way. But yeah, not my favorite A24 movies. I feel like this is a movie that people really love when they've seen like a couple of A24 movies. Like, oh man, Swiss Army Man, so exciting. But like, maybe watch some other movies. Anyway, go ahead, Scott. Why do you not have this on your list?
Haven't seen it either, and you didn't make me want to watch it. That doesn't sound like the type of thing that I would enjoy. But you know, maybe just for the sake of making my A24 overall list more well-rounded. But
all right. I don't hate this movie, Dom, but you should see more A24. Oh, right.
33, dude.
Like, you know, but it's the first two acts are great. It was just that third act, man. Like, it didn't come together. I was like, what? You know, recognize your farts, all that. That's really, I'm all about that. That's great. But it didn't. It felt a little bit pointless. It felt like it was building up to a point that wasn't there. And I wish they would have never gotten off that island and met her. That didn't do anything for me. So, like, as much as I went through the whole time being like, I'm that weirdo they're talking to by the end, it didn't feel that weird to me, and it just didn't quite deliver at the end to leave that lasting impact. So,
damn.
Sorry.
All right, we're up into the very, very top of these lists. This will be very interesting.
I take back my apology because I know that we're about to have a fight anyways here.
Yeah, it's trying to become a bloodbath here.
Is motherfucking Midsommar.
I mean, I've got same place for me. So
Ari Aster's masterpiece, masterwork. One of the best movie of last year. One of the best movies of the 2010s. This movie is incredible to me. It is so much more than a Wicker Man ripoff. That's what you can say if you look at the cover of it and don't watch the movie. I will say that without admitting any more to the officers who are listening, I've had some psychedelic experiences in my life. And if you have not, you are missing out on an aspect of this movie that cannot be explained to you here. I'm sorry. I live in Washington, D.C. after the movie. I looked at the people next to me who probably were coming from their Cap Hill boring-ass job. I asked them, have you ever done mushrooms before? And they both looked at me like, no. I'm like, you missed out on an aspect of this movie. This movie was an experience. It shook me absolutely from the opening scene, which was one of the most emotional scenes I've seen in a long time. Throughout the movie, I absolutely hate Christian. I think he may be more of a villain to me than Black Phillip. Everything that happened in this movie that happens to him, he fucking deserves. And it is just such a breakdown and examination of shitty ass fucking relationships and people pretending to be there for you and that making you a better person because of tragedy. I don't want to like even go into why that relates to my own life, but I have more than one relationship that this reminded me of. And this movie made me extremely upset. I have no problem admitting that. I saw this movie 4 times in theaters. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that many times in theaters. Each time I got more emotional from it. I can watch this movie right after now and no problem. I don't have to be in any mood for this movie. It is insanely rewatchable. The set design, the sound design, the examination of how we view death, the examination of how we view empathy, just everything about this movie is everything to me. And the fact that some people don't get it only adds to my love of this movie. It is such a deep movie. I can't even stress how deep it is to me. Florence Pugh's performance, the final shot of her finally smiling, made me want to cheer like I was watching Sing Street, another Jack Rayner movie. In the end of Sing Street, made me want to cheer like that, but for Florence Pugh. She is my queen. I love her. The visual distortion, you can just pick up on it in different spots, and it's just so authentic. I literally felt like I was tripping. I could not believe. I've never seen a movie able to show what an experience of doing mushrooms wrong felt like more. Just This movie is incredible, a masterpiece. It's not number one because I love that one. Just a tiny. I fucking love this movie. I could talk about it forever. It's incredible.
So Aaron thinks it's a decent movie. Scott, how do you feel about Midsommar?
50-50.
Yeah, this is also my number 2. I think it's amazing for a lot of the reasons Aaron said. I didn't really get to talk about Hereditary, but I think that Hereditary is very good, not great, and I think it showed a lot of potential from Ari Aster, and that this movie is the potential being realized. I think that's how I look at this. But yeah, technically, it's mind blowing. I think, 1917 might be like the most visually impressive movie that they pulled it off last year, but from a visually interesting movie, I think this is the one that takes the cake from last year. From the production design, the different camera techniques, the tracking shots, the overhead shots, everything works, I think, for creating this really sort of claustrophobic, even though it's like in this really serene, forest setting where it looks like it could just go on for ages. It's just, the woods. It somehow creates a really claustrophobic atmosphere, I think, with the cinematography and with the really cramped quarters inside some of the buildings and stuff that are actually on the commune. But then, the story, I think, is what gives this a leg up for me over Hereditary. I think there are some similar beats with the family grief aspect of it, but then what it does with relationships, I think, is so interesting. And I, despite Aaron's feelings, I think that it's more complicated than just simply rooting for what happens to Jack Rayner's character at the end. I think that the movie wants you to think about. I think it's challenging, and it refuses to answer. It refuses to give an easy answer to what happens at the end of the movie. I think it wants you to engage with that a little more critically and think about, well, how do we actually feel about this? Is this the best way for this whole thing to come to a head? But yeah, the way that Jack Rayner's character is portrayed, I think, is so believable because he's not outwardly mustache twirling villain, but it's this collection of microaggressions, right? He's forgetting her birthday, and he's not reacting in the way to certain things that he should be reacting to. He gets under your skin, even though he's not again, an over the top villain in any way. He gets under your skin in a way that I think is really believable. And yeah, Florence Pugh, even better than her work in Little Women. I think her emotional range is just it's the entire gambit in this movie, and the way that Aster uses her screams from the beginning of the movie, and that sound evolves over the course of the movie, building up to this final scene where you hear all of the screams in this amazing cathartic scene. I love it, and I think it's also strangely funny in some parts. I think that people laughed at certain parts of the movie in the theater, and they thought that they were laughing because it was bad, but actually the movie wants you to be laughing at certain parts, which I think is interesting. And yeah, I know some people have trouble with the ending, but I enjoyed this thoroughly throughout. I've seen it 3 times, seen the director's cut. I love it.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Just one more thing, and I won't go on another rant about how I'm on the fence about this movie, but is that talking to people afterwards about this movie, and certain people who just don't get how shitty of a person Christian was, really has made me re-examine some of my own friendships and relationships. It's you don't get how shitty it is to lie to someone for 6 months after a horrible tragedy, pretending you love them, and then continuously doing things like making trips to these weren't just little white lies he was doing. It was he despised this girl, and he was well, it'd be wrong to break up with her because something bad has happened. I just put myself in that situation. I've had tragedies happen, and people stick by me for a finite amount of time after them, and then realize they're only there because they felt like they had to be. That sense of that's just bullshit. So talking to people afterwards about this movie and those themes coming up, and how some people define bullshit as a really good way of being there for someone, has been one of the most disturbing aspects of the movie for me. So I died.
So it's funny that Scott mentions this movie getting underneath your skin. There is a movie missing from every single goddamn list. That is a whole other thing to go on trial for later.
Christian, man.
I think that interestingly enough, this movie and Phantom Thread kind of have a lot in common, where I think they construct a lot of scenes that on their face are supposed to be sort of sad and serious, but I think are really meant to be humorous and funny. And I think that there's a lot of moments where people don't know if they should be laughing, but they want to be laughing. And I think that's such an interesting sensation to be created by the filmmaker. I think the unrelenting sunlight is one of the most unnerving things about this movie, because especially if you see it in a theater, just this assault of it just being daytime the entire movie, and they're like, there's supposedly time passing, but the sun is still up and still up and still up. It drains you, and I think in a similar way that these people feel drained. I do think that Josh was punished a little harshly. I don't know if he was quite as bad as the rest of the guys on the trip.
Yeah.
But again, there are a lot of great moments. I think that the coronation of the May Queen sequence is amazing. The whole dance, with the camera swiveling around. I think that's really strong filmmaking. Some really horrifying stuff, looking through doorways and seeing things that no one should ever have to see in their entire lives.
Push.
It's crazy that this entire village was all built by the filmmakers, by the production designers. Like every single piece, they were in a giant open field in Europe, and they built everything from the ground up. That's so impressive to me. And I love that we can go on for so long about this movie, because Cody, not on this panel, who would definitely not be a fan of this movie, just like many people in this community.
The last time I brought it up on here, it did not go well.
Yeah. So
let Dom talk about it. He's a big.
All right, Dom. Why is this movie not on your list?
So where Ari Aster kind of remade The Exorcist, I would say 2/3 well with Hereditary. This movie, he completely ripped off The Wicker Man. Yeah, I know. I'll get it out of the way. Rip that Band-Aid off. I don't care. I didn't like this movie one bit. I think that's out of the first 10 minutes of this movie, which to me are the only compelling parts. I think the rest of this movie is long and boring. I feel like Ari Aster grossly misunderstands people and their own little idiosyncrasies. Yes, guess what? I'm sorry. Sticking by somebody because their sister just killed their parents does not automatically make them a shithead and worthy of getting murdered by a cult. I'm sorry. Like, maybe that's just like a little bit too much of my real world sensibilities, but nothing in that movie, none of those characters deserve any of the actions that directly happen to them just because, they're shitty tourists on a trip. And the rest of it, it's just horror cliche after horror cliche. Sure, it looks pretty, but to me, there's nothing engrossing about that movie that, like, I feel like makes the rest of A24's filmography really compelling. And to me, it almost kind of proved that I wasn't crazy about not loving Hereditary and thinking that it was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Dom prefers the Skate Kitchen remake, also known as mid-90s, but that is another conversation for another day. Speaking of movies that are just pale imitations of other movies. But anyway, Dom, what's your number 2?
Yeah, my number 2. So again, this is probably going to be another one. Is like everyone calls Dom like, he's the basic bitch. He has this movie super high, but I don't care because this movie's still fucking perfect, and I still do think it deserves Best Picture over La La Land, which is Moonlight. Where's that graphic? There it is, Koho. Yeah, there's that graphic. This movie to me is still perfect. Designing a movie about 3 separate stories that are all interconnected by one overarching arc. That's something that I haven't seen done really well since 1999 Doug Liman's Go. And I think this movie does that exceptionally well, but obviously in a much different way. Tell the story of Chiron. And what can I say about this movie that hasn't already been said? Like, the use of color, blue is clearly my favorite color. But this movie utilizes that, like utilizing the different shades. Even during the daytime, you can still see flecks of it on the character's skin, and how he uses like different shades of color in order to illuminate the character at the different stages of life that he's at, the different stages of understanding, the different stages of acceptance of who he is, where he is in this world, what his placement is in this world, and how he can kind of make of that what he will. The subtle little gestures and hints that this movie has to previous sections, certain sections that most people, it would just kind of go over their heads, like the previous mention of Mahershala Ali's Juan passing when he was such an important character in the first half of this movie, to when he's an adult later on in his life, seeing the guys that terrorized him as a teenager and kind of ended up being the reason unintentionally why he ended up in jail, and see them now as like this big burly man, but like he's still that can easily take those guys up, but he's still like kind of haunted by the demons of his past. There's just so much underlying humanity in this movie that still to me makes it probably, if not for my number 1 choice, the most compelling A24 movie. It's a very humanistic movie. It's a very tragic movie, but it's also a very touching movie. I feel like that people can find a lot of forgiveness from too, overall.
All right, looks like Dom hit about 5 words per second in that entire little diatribe there. But as much as I would like to make fun of him, this is probably actually my favorite A24 movie. I just think it's so beautiful. I've talked about it many times on many different platforms. One little thing I'll say, I think the Jharrel Jerome performance as Teenage Kevin is one that's really underrated in this movie. I think that he's a lot like the Trevante Rhodes performance in that there's this veneer that he's putting on, but it's very clear that there's something right beneath that that goes so much deeper into his character, into his past, and sort of his relationships with women and with men, in his personal life. And I mean, this is a movie that from top to bottom, I just don't think that there's really anything that is not great about it, and it's so personal. And yeah, why Scott and Aaron? Why do you guys hate? Anyway, go ahead.
Hate a community. Oh, wow, that's where we're going with this. So,
I will raise my hand. I will raise my hand and say I'm probably wrong for not including this on my list. I will say that, but I have still only seen the movie one time, and it was right after it came out. And I think just the two things that hold me back: number one, it was overhyped for me for sure, but number two, as a straight white man, like there is a certain like disconnect that I have. I mean, there are universal ideas at play in the movie for sure, but I still think that I connect with other movies a little bit more, and like that's not a fault of the movie at all. Like the movie is just not. It's for a different subset of people, and that's perfectly fine. And there should be movies for that subset of people. And so, I mean, I think that that's perfectly fine that I don't relate to everything in this movie, but I still think I need to rewatch it because I really liked after watching If Beale Street Could Talk. I really loved that as well, and I think this is one that would definitely grow on a rewatch for me. I just probably wasn't in the right headspace when I saw it the first time.
I will say just real quick, I actually think that that You Are Who the movie sort of is made for. I think it's supposed to be a window into this world that you may not necessarily have a familiarity with, and I think it's breaching that social sort of barrier that I think that is set up by the way that our world works. And I think that what's so great about the movie is it allows someone that doesn't necessarily relate to the experience, sort of it allows them to step inside and see sort of the beginning, the middle, and sort of the result of everything that type of community can create. But anyway, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing. That those kind of critiques are some of the reasons that I really did like the movie. And I feel that this was really well done. This is probably 13th or 14th for me on my list. So, I mean, my top 20 to 25 A24 movies, those are interchangeable, to be honest, besides the top 2 or 3. So it's a great, great movie. Some beautiful, beautiful acting, and just there's several scenes that really stick out to me. For this kind of subject to be rewatchable, I really give it a lot of props. It's one of my most rewatched A24 movies. And yeah, just definitely deserved the Oscar over La La Land. I'm very glad that the Oscars got that correct. So
you heard that, Koho, running the stream? He's probably going to put something on the screen that's like,
he's going to put You Are on trial now.
Yeah, sure.
For once, me and Koho are going to disagree. I can't believe it. It's like, I'm so worried. But either way, this just finished outside my top 10, along with Under the Skin. Definitely Under the Skin's number 11 for me, Paul. So, I mean, like, number 10A or 10B is Under the Skin. Just
not enough farting and dreaming about Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Anyway, on to our number ones. This is what we've all been building towards.
Okay.
This is... wait, I'm not going to spoil it. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, my number one, and only my number one, is Yorgos Lanthimos' The Lobster. I just, like I said at the beginning of my list, right time, right place for these movies is a huge reason for a lot of the placement on this list. Literally the day before I went to see this movie with my mom, mind you, had no idea anything about it at the time. I got the worst relationship of my life, and which won't get into the details, but made up diseases and things like that were involved, and kind of my whole opinions on finding love and its importance in our society and everything were kind of at its max cynical level. So this cynical, dry, black comedy that Yorgos Lanthimos brought here with The Lobster was exactly what I wanted, exactly what I needed at the time. I find this movie, the first critique, which I'll get out of the way, the first half is way stronger than the second half. I will admit that. I wish that the whole movie was the first half of the movie, essentially. But the second half, especially the final decision Colin Farrell is making in the bathroom, have really stuck with me. And the implications that have on a relationship and honesty. Again, touch on similar themes to Midsommar for me. In this movie, there's just some of the scenes in this movie really, just make me stare at the screen and just not even react, kind of just shocked. The cookie girl jumping out of the window and her screams still kind of stick with me. What happens to Colin Farrell's brother in the movie as a person who runs his own dog company, hard to watch, hard to stomach. And all of this, the first time it was going through, I'm watching next to my mom, who can't watch anything that's at all disturbing, somehow makes it through a movie that starts with a horse getting shot by a woman. And weird as that is, I bring that up because it only added to my experience of this movie. She hates this movie, by the way. Fucking can't stand it. But I mean, for me, I left it in it. Like, it felt like a religious experience to me almost. It just felt like I needed to hear this kind of stuff. And it's a movie that I continue to rewatch and I find absolutely hilarious. Yorgos Lanthimos' style completely works for me in most of his movies, but I think this is his best work. And for me, this is the movie that definitely put A24 on the map for me. Before this, I didn't ever pay attention to really that A24 logo, and then afterwards, I would seek out A24 movies. This is just this movie is not for everybody, and I totally understand the critiques I've heard from people who don't connect to it. But yeah, Rachel Weisz is amazing in this movie as well. John C. Reilly is hilarious. I love this movie, and it is really speaks to a spirit of mine that I've been able to grow out of since then, but still I'm able to go back and look back and be like, oh man, at some point I really thought like this completely, and this is embarrassing to think about. And now I can view it as a comedy and not like a drama as I did the first time I watched it, frankly. So
first time you thought it was a tragedy, then Aaron realized. Anyway, moving on from that reference. For me, this is my least favorite Yorgos movie. I think that you talked about it earlier. It totally loses me as soon as he leaves the grounds. I think is that really it falls apart. I love it as a comedy of manners, but I think that when it makes that turn in the second half, I just think that stuff is really, really weak, and it doesn't really fit together with the first half in a way that I think binds those two stories together. I love this sort of sterile atmosphere of that first half, and I just don't think that I just think it gets a lot worse from there. I do like the first half quite a bit, and I think that the actors are doing a pretty good job. I just think that the direction it goes down is something that I really just wasn't interested in following. But Scott and Dominic, why was this not on your list?
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I think I agree that the second half loses its way, and I think I even found it a little dull at times, which like most movies, I can usually find something to keep me interested in most movies just because you're watching a movie. But there were some times when I felt that this was a little dull, and I think it just in general it didn't do enough probably with the premise and how interesting the premise is. But I mean, I like Yorgos Lanthimos. I think The Favorite is better.
All right, and on to Scott's number one. What do we got here?
I'm kind of sad this hasn't been brought up, but my number one is The Florida Project. And I think that I definitely need to go back and watch Moonlight now, because I think what you said about Moonlight is kind of how I feel about The Florida Project, and the way that it gives you a window into this group of people that you wouldn't otherwise maybe pay attention to. And it really looks at poverty in America in a very critical way, and and not just poverty, but this specific group of people who are living like on the very edge of like making it, right? Like, literally, in fact, living on the edge of the birthplace of happiness, right? Disney World, but yet they're kind of like living day to day, week to week, trying to make it. And so that dichotomy I think is so interesting. And I also love that Sean Baker tells the story from the perspective of a child. I think that that's a great decision to like. It really simplifies what's going on, because I think in the way that children look at complex issues like what this movie is tackling in a really simple way that kind of strips away the truth. Like sometimes children, because of the simplicity of their vision, can see can look at complex ideas and pull the truth out of those ideas, whereas older and wiser people might not be able to. And like the little moments of like joy that the characters find, that the child characters find, like the eating the ice cream cone, or just like looking at your favorite tree, something like that, contrasted with like these, big lows that you may not even really be able to appreciate the significance of until like obviously the crushing devastation of what happens at the end of the movie. But I think another thing Sean Baker's really good at is getting naturalistic performances from his actors, and he definitely gets that here from Brooklyn Prince. And Bria Vanate, who plays the mother, I think doesn't get enough credit for her role in this movie. She was just an Instagram model, and Sean Baker just like DM'd her and was like, "Hey, you want to be in this movie?" And I think she gives a great performance and a very interesting a complex character. I remember coming out of the movie when I saw it in theaters and hearing some lady in the lobby be like, "Well, the mother was just such an awful mother. She was such an awful person," or whatever. And I was just like, "You're missing the point." I wanted to just like scream at her because that has always stuck with me. But I think her character is interesting. Willem Dafoe, I think, like one of the great like Good Samaritan characters that in recent movies, as the sort of the motel keeper here who keeps giving them second, third, and fourth chances. And yeah, it's just an totally emotional journey that you feel everything watching this movie, just maybe as you do like when you're a child. And I don't know that I've seen a movie which better captures the experience of what it's like to be a child. And yeah, it's one of my favorite movies ever, probably, and it's my definite number one on this list.
Yeah, this is a movie that I like quite a bit. I do wonder if not having seen it in a theater affected a little bit the way that I feel about it. I think it loses steam, I think, towards the middle. I do love the very, very ending. I know that's like one of the most controversial sort of parts of the movie is what people think of that final sequence.
And I will say that I didn't like it the first time. Like the first time, that was the only thing holding me back from being like, "Oh, this movie's perfect." But I grew to love it on a rewatch. I think ultimately it does work.
Yeah, and I do think that actually Bria Vanate is a little uneven as a performer. I know that sort of comes with the territory, but I think that is sort of the lacking element. I do like the Dafoe performance just because it's not the simple, he's just nice for the sake of being nice. Like he's a realistic and somewhat pragmatic person in his approach, but I think ultimately it shows that he is a good person. Brooklyn Prince, I think, is amazing. Like this is one of the great kid performances of the last decade or so. There's just something about this movie, I guess, that just it gets a little lost in itself, I think, at times, especially towards the middle when they're sort of wandering around. I just don't think that it reaches that sort of height that I think it was sort of on the path to do. Again, I do love the ending. I think it's a really, really great movie. But just it wouldn't even be in my really top 10 probably, even though it's a movie that I like quite a bit. So what about you, Dom and Aaron? How do you guys feel about this movie?
I really, really enjoyed this movie. A lot more than I feel like I have enjoyed a lot of other ones that were mentioned that didn't make it onto my personal top 10. I feel like this movie, it was very unconvincing, even by A24 standard. Like when I watched this movie, I'm like, okay, I was a little bit more familiar with A24's track record at this point, but I still was very, very surprised by what this movie gave me, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that a lot. But at the same time, this movie just felt like it was missing. It was one of those movies where it's like all the pieces are there for this to be perfect, and it is a really, really well-made movie. But I feel like it's basically just that one little piece that's holding it back from being perfect, and that's the only reason why I didn't have it as high as you did, Scott.
Yeah, it just didn't quite connect with me, I guess, as strongly as I was expecting it to. I haven't rewatched it, and I haven't had a desire to, and that is a lot of times kind of how I use my baseline with a lot of A24 movies. And so, yeah, I just the last scene worked fine for me. I didn't dislike it. I didn't find it to be one of the greatest scenes ever. Learning about it makes the movie cooler, but most movies are cooler once you learn about them a little more. Yeah, it was solid, but not in my top 20.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen his other movies, especially Takeout, I would highly recommend seeing Sean Baker's other work. But on to the final number one, the one that we have all been waiting for. Just kidding. That's just Dom has been waiting for this.
Wow.
Go ahead.
damn, way to build me up and then just smack me down from my pedestal. That's fine. I think somebody else here had this movie on their list, but if so, this is a controversial talking about the yikes, which is of course that's right. It was you, Aaron. My number one is Uncut Gems.
I also had it. Yeah.
Oh, awesome! So all three of us can talk about it.
Is this the only movie all three of us had?
I think
believe
so. That's actually pretty great. That's actually pretty great if you think about it now. This movie is fucking great. Like, there's nothing about this movie that I don't like. Even the elements that I don't like and that I didn't like at first, when I rewatched this movie, I'm like, yeah, this movie's just fucking perfect. It's just A24, I feel like, has this stigma of, for some reason, they feel like they can only ever be weird and not be fun. And this is one of the only movies that I've seen from them in out of the 5 years now that I've been watching them, where I'm like, this movie was just a blast. Which, you talk about Adam Sandler playing a gambling addict in one of the most pulse-pounding movies that has been compared to the feeling of having a heart attack. And the fun is not exactly the word that would come to mind, but I feel like it's his line when he first gets the gem, where he's like, holy fuck, I'm gonna come. That just signifies the ultimate tune of this movie and the ride that you're about to go on. And, oh man, the minute that this movie starts, it does not stop. I talked about good time in that sense, but again, it's the way that the Safdies talked about this movie, where they said they kind of incorporated a little piece of every single one of their movies into this movie to make this one completely crazy, bombastic journey about this one gambling addict that's struggling to get it all and going against the odds every single time. But the thing that I like about this movie so much is that it keeps it just grounded enough that you never think it's going too ridiculous. So what are your guys' thoughts on Uncut Gems?
I think next highest was Scott, maybe, I believe.
Yeah, I had it at 4. I've never liked Adam Sandler. In fact, I've quite disliked him in most movies. And so it shocked me to discover that really all I needed was a movie where that's just him reacting to old NBA playoff games. That would be what would make me like Adam Sandler. But this movie, like you said, it's a wild ride. And I think the moment for me which stands out is towards the end of the movie, after the final bet happens, and there's a shot of Eric Bogosian's face and just his reaction to what has just gone on, what he's just seen. This sort of like, he's in a position where he should just like hate Adam Sandler's guts, but there's just this little bit of bemusement in like his expression that I think sums up exactly what our experience through the entire movie is with the character, because he's not a likable character. He's not a good person. And yet, like, you just can't quit him because he just keeps going on one more score after one more score. And even as he, makes increasingly ill-advised decisions, like it's enjoyable to go along for the ride, even though ultimately I think it ends exactly how it should end. It ends in the only way that this movie really can end. And so I really appreciate that, even though I think people were turned off by the ending. Maybe, I mean, the cinema score was like a C for this. And the ending is really the one thing I could think of. But I mean, I guess, it is an anxiety inducing movie throughout. The sound design, I think, really contributes to that, in the way that they layer the dialogue over the background noise and all of that. I think definitely adds to some of the anxiety of the movie. But yeah, this and the supporting cast, I think, deserves a shout out too, because I think Julia Fox and Kevin Garnett are both surprisingly really excellent. So of all the 2019 movies that I really liked, this is the one that keeps sticking with me, and then I think I would move even higher on my top 10 list if I were to redo it again today.
I also love this movie. It's the most Jewish movie I've ever seen in my life. As a member 100%. Of the tribe, I can say this. It is so like, there are little lines in this movie, like when Kevin Garnett's walking with Adam Sandler, he's like, man, what is it with Jews in basketball? And there is an obsession. We cannot play. We suck at the game, but we are obsessed with like the NBA. We are obsessed with basketball. Jews and like, it's the reason Jews and black people get along so well. I'm convinced of it. And as someone who grew up with more black friends than white friends, this movie was made for me and my boys. I went with them. I'm like, this is our black Jewish movie we've been talking about our whole lives. Like, it is just, again, with A24, authentic as fuck. It is anxious. This is real anxiety. This isn't someone being like, let's pretend. the Safdies have anxiety disorder, no doubt, and it makes them a fantastic group of artists. And I mean, Adam Sandler, this is right up there with Punch Drunk Love for me. For his best performance, I don't know which one I love more. Punch Drunk Love is one of my favorite movies of all time, so it's hard. But I mean, this movie is incredible. The score by Louboutin is unreal. It's a great movie. I don't understand the people who put Good Time ahead of it with regard to the Safdies. It is uncut gems all day long, and it has replaced Fiddler on the Roof as my most Jewish movie.
Did you say Lopatin, or did you say his real name, which is Watertrix Point Never? He is Watertrix Point Never. God damn it!
I feel like you misunderstand the phrase "real name." But anyway, I do like this movie a lot. It's really weird. This is a great movie, and it was at the bottom half of my top 10. But I just feel like there's something weird. I don't know what it is, because this is like a lot of my interest coalescing into one movie. Mm-hmm. I'm like an obsessive NBA fan, and there's a lot of Kevin Garnett and The Weeknd's in this, and Mike Francesa playing a bookie is like one of the most amazing castings for anyone who's familiar with who he is.
Right.
I think, and again, it's a great movie. I think the one thing holding it back from being like a perfect movie for me is I think the relationship between him and Idina Menzel, something feels a little inauthentic with that. And I think the portrayal of her as a person is a little overly screechy, and I feel like it doesn't quite give the totality of experience that I think that character and that person deserves. Other than that, I think the movie is pretty much amazing from top to bottom. You mentioned the Julia Fox performance. I think she's like almost as good as Sandler in this movie. I think that she is this anchor, and the reason you care about him is because you see how she cares about him, and I think that makes you have this sort of empathy and sympathy through her. And that's why when he does stuff to her, that feels so visceral. It feels so like angry because he's screwing over the one person who's like unavowedly in his corner, kind of thing. But I just think it's a great movie. It's got an amazing ending. I think how the ending relates to the very beginning and the very opening scene is so perfect, and how that is so poetic. And I think you can see early on in the movie, there's a scene with in the parking lot. I won't get too much into it, not to spoil the movie, but there's a look on Bogosian's face of uneasiness, and I think that he is the heavy of the movie, but even he knows that he might be a little in over his head, I think, and I think that is such a great and prescient moment in terms of the movie. Seeing it on a second time on the big screen it's really weird. I saw this first at home on a screener, and then on the big screen, and that was like a leveling up sort of the movie. It helped me appreciate it in a different way. It's not one of my favorite A24 movies, but I do think it's really, really strong. I actually think Sandler's better in this than Punch Drunk, even though I like Punch Drunk a little more. I think in Punch Drunk you can see Sandler kind of seep out into the character. I feel like this is just Howie through and through. He's so committed to that performance. And I love the way he talks and his phraseology and the slipperiness. And you see these people he's screwing over all throughout the day, but you still root for him. And I think that's sort of the masterstroke of the movie. It's making you care about someone that you probably should.
And two more things. Just one is the casting overall is that the Safdies do, and making like Lakeith Stanfield an unlikable douchebag. It's the first time he's ever been unlikable in a movie. So it's just like that. Real props there, and psychedelic colonoscopy. I mean, that's just
I do love what happens with that later on. The reveal of the colonoscopy. But yeah, I guess that concludes our show on A24. We'll just hit you with that final list. As you can see, those are the respective lists. As you can see, the grades that flashed on there. I'm going to go ahead and give Scott an A-. Scott, you win the show today.
Redemption.
Next up behind him is going to be Aaron with a B-.
So depressed at that score.
pretty strong overall. I think with a few weak spots, a couple of movies really high up there, and then Dom coming in at last with that crisp C-, with a handful of movies that I don't think belong anywhere near the list, which is why your list sucks today. But our collective list finally between the three of us, or the three of you, number 10 is going to be Swiss Army Man, number 9, 8th Grade, number 8, The Witch, number 7, Moonlight, number 6, The Lobster, number 5, The Florida Project, number 4, Under the Silver Lake, 3, Ex Machina, 2, Midsommar, and number 1, Uncut Gems. I think a little weirder list than I think people might have been expecting, especially from a group that shares the traits that this group happens to share, however random and semantic they are. But no, this is a super fun show. I know that Sometimes A24 talk can get a little into the film bro discussion, but I think this is a fun show. And as you can see, the next few topics we have there, go ahead and send your lists either to Koho or to either Cody or the people hosting those lists. As you can see, overrated classics with Kaleb Boatman. Go ahead and send those lists in ASAP. Rock anthems with Brooklyn Vail. And favorite movies of all time, March 11th. That's a big one. And then directorial debuts on March 18th. A lot of very different and interesting topics, I think. But yeah, it was fun to celebrate a studio that I think puts out such great work. In 2020, I'm personally really excited for stuff like After Yang and Minari and Boy State.
After Yang is going to be great. I'm looking forward to that.
But we'll see. Yeah, so this was our A24 episode. Go ahead and send in your lists and keep on sucking.
Well, I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown. I amuse you.
Eat shit. How's that? Eat shit. Eat shit. Eat shit.
Smug smile.
Definitely eat shit.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
You can't handle the truth.